By the early 1950s, jets such as the Meteor were outclassed by swept-wing designs, such as the American F-86 Sabre or the Russian MiG-15. Cam's team therefore began experimenting with swept-wing designs, which reduced drag at high speeds, and a number of prototypes were produced. The P-1072 was a prototype with a rocket motor in the tail, making it Britain's first rocket-assisted aircraft. It flew 6 times before an explosion caused the project to be abandoned. In the Korean War, these aircraft had demonstrated superiority over first-generation straight-wing jets. From these experiments emerged a prototype, the P-1067, which satisfied an Air Ministry specification for a swept-wing, single-seat fighter. This developed into the magnificent Hawker Hunter, in which the company's work in jet development finally paid off. The P-1067 had its maiden flight in July 1951 and made a great impression at the Farnborough Air Show that September. It was already being called the world's finest fighter aircraft, and 350 were pre-ordered. The Hunter became identified in the public mind with its pilot, Neville Duke. A Second World War ace, he became a celebrity in the 1950s, as famous as footballer Stanley Matthews or mountaineer Edmund Hillary. A highlight each year at the Farnborough Air Show were Neville Duke's high-speed, low-level runs down the runway in the Hunter or the double bangs, produced by shock waves when he aimed the aircraft at the airfield in a transonic dive. Duke was forced to resign as a test pilot in 1956 due to injuries caused by several forced landings. Later he became vice president of the Eagle Club, and it is thought that Dan Dare, pilot of the future, was based on him. The Hawker Hunter is regarded by many as the most graceful jet aircraft ever to fly, and proved Sidney Cam's continuing ability to produce the most effective designs. Roy Chaplin said of Cam that although he was an engineer, he was first and foremost an artist, with an outstanding eye for line. When Winston Churchill was returned to power in 1951, he set about tackling the weaknesses in the military, and the Hunter was identified as a super-priority aircraft, a scheme whereby projects of great importance to the re-equipment of the services were fast-tracked. With this government support, high-volume Hunter production started at Kingston, Armstrong Whitworth in Coventry, and at Squires Gate in Blackpool, which Hawker Aircraft had now leased. There were problems, however, with the Mark I and Mark II Hunters, with its engines, high-altitude gun firing, air brakes and endurance, and these delayed the aircraft going into service until 1954. Characteristically, Sidney Cam soon turned his mind to an improved version. "Off with the old and on with the new," was one of his sayings. He now proposed a more powerful Mark III version with greater wing sweep. This would have become the first supersonic RAF fighter. With the prototype nearly complete, the Air Ministry cancelled the project in favour of a development of the Supermarine Swift, itself cancelled at an even later stage of development. These two cancellations marked Britain's opt-out of the race to build the first generation of supersonic fighters, then under development by the Americans and Russians. 1953 was a momentous year for Hawker Aircraft. After the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, there was news that both Sidney Cam and Thomas Sopwith were to be knighted in the Coronation Honours List for services to aviation. In Sopwith's case, his knighthood was arguably long overdue. Sidney Cam was deeply suspicious of glittering prizes. His granddaughter later recalled, "He was never one to blow his own trumpet, and had to be persuaded to accept his knighthood." Sir Peter Masefield said of Cam and Sopwith, "Sidney Cam had great respect for Tommy Sopwith and never interrupted when he was speaking. Sopwith was always the boss, but Sidney was a curious chap, brilliant designer, autocratic in the design office, but never to Tommy Sopwith. He realised Sopwith was the man he owed everything to, and he spoke very respectfully to him. There were very few people he did speak respectfully to." In September 1953, Neville Duke set a world speed record in the prototype Hunter, refitted with a reheated Avon engine. Flying over Littlehampton, he achieved a speed of 727.6 miles per hour, pushing the aircraft performance well into the transonic region. With the supersonic project stalled, the Hunter was developed in the ground attack role. Mark IVs and Vs, with Avon and Sapphire engines respectively, were able to carry a wide range of armaments. The Mark VI combined this armament capability with an engine giving it 25% more power. The result was an outstanding fighter, and the Hunter Mark VI, recognisable by its distinctive sawtooth wing, became the preeminent jet fighter of the Cold War, a classic go-anywhere, do-anything aircraft. It became a mainstay of the RAF and saw action in Suez, Aden and Indonesia. It was adopted as a NATO aircraft and was sold to 19 air forces around the world, securing Hawker Aircraft's future until well into the 1960s and enabling the rebuild of the Richmond Road site. The manoeuvrability and fine controls of the Hunter Mark VI also made it one of the world's finest aerobatic aircraft. Spectators at air shows in the 1950s and 1960s thrilled to displays of RAF teams such as the Black Arrows and the Blue Diamonds. A two-seater version of the Hunter was also developed as an advanced trainer, further developing the market for the aircraft. Nearly 2,000 Hunters were built, and the aircraft had an extraordinarily long life. There are still military-registered Hunters flying today. But still, Sidney Cam's aspiration was to build an advanced supersonic interceptor, and plans were developed in response to another Air Ministry requirement. The requirement was subsequently changed, but Hawker Aircraft were encouraged to continue the design as a private venture, risking £1 million of company money. Redesignated the P-1121 Air Superiority and Strike aircraft, a prototype had been ordered when, suddenly, everything changed. The new Conservative Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, had to face up to the realities of the post-Suez world. It was clear that his administration would cut defence spending and carry out a rationalisation of Britain's aircraft industry. His Defence Secretary was Duncan Sandys, who on the 4th of April 1957 published his infamous Defence White Paper. The White Paper proposed the replacement of manned aircraft with a ground-to-air guided missile system. In the future, it argued, nuclear weapons would no longer be carried by aircraft and so would not need to be intercepted by fighters. Future defence would be by guided missiles alone. So, all existing aircraft projects were scrapped, with the exception of the English Electric Lightning, then too far advanced to cancel, and missile systems were ordered. The White Paper, which also put an end to national service, saw no prospect of future aircraft projects after the Lightning. There was consternation in the aviation industry that saw this policy as a gross strategic error. Sopwith was not impressed. "We knew that this was stupid and dangerous," he later said. "So we ignored it and manoeuvred behind the scenes to get the decision scrapped. It didn't take long. The manned aeroplane is still with us and will be for a long time yet." In retrospect, the Sands White Paper was viewed as a ruse to slash costs and to pull back from Britain's NATO obligations. The problem was that missile technology was not advanced enough to base a defence strategy around, and would not be for many years. The policy was indeed later reversed, but by then the damage had been done to the British aircraft industry. At Hawker Aircraft there was disbelief that such an unrealistic policy could stand, and more money was spent on the P1121 as a private venture. Eventually, however, they had to bow to the inevitable, and the project was scrapped. So, for the second time, Sidney Cam had been frustrated in his attempt to build a supersonic fighter. The abandonment of high-speed research allowed countries such as the USA and France to forge ahead, while Britain was left behind. Once the advantage was lost, it proved impossible to regain. Dassault Aviation in France subsequently sold their Mirage 3 jets all over the world, proving there was a market for supersonic aircraft. A Dassault manager told British aircraft chiefs, "If it were not for the clumsy way you tackle things in Britain, you could have made the Mirage yourselves." Another result was the cancellation of 100 Hunters for the RAF, and redundancies loomed at Richmond Road. Production of the Mark VII was moved back to Kingston from the Blackpool factory, which was now closed. Fortunately, an order for 200 Hunters was received soon afterwards from India, allowing working to continue as before. The 1957 White Paper made clear that future contracts would only go to large consortiums and not to individual companies. This forced the aircraft industry to consolidate, and by 1960 all the great names of British aviation had been subsumed into two giant conglomerates. Hawker Siddeley now additionally swallowed up Folland, based at Hamble, de Havilland at Hatfield, and the long-established firm of Blackburn, based at Brough. The group was renamed Hawker Siddeley Aviation. The second block was the British Aircraft Corporation, headed by Sir George Edwards, former chief designer at Vickers. This was composed of English Electric, Vickers Armstrong, Bristol Aircraft, and Supermarine. This period also saw the death of Fred Sigrist, who had faded from the story due to ill health. Unable to take British winters, he had retired to the warmth of the Bahamas on medical advice. Sopwith, now the last survivor of the original gang, paid tribute to one of the best engineers who had the priceless gift of getting the best out of all who worked for him. With money available from the sale of Hawker Hunters, it was decided that a more fitting corporate headquarters was long overdue. From 1957, the Richmond Road site was redeveloped under John Lidbury. The new frontage quickly became a familiar Kingston landmark, but not without controversy. Lidbury had fiercely resisted architects' plans to build in concrete and glass, then seen as ultra-modern, in favour of a more classical building which reflected the Bentall's facade and in turn Wren's Hampton Court Palace. He also authorised marble for the entrance hall, to the disapproval of Sir Frank Dobson, Hawker Siddeley's parsimonious and blunt Northern Board member. Lidbury responded that it was actually travertine, to which Dobson replied, "It's bloody marvellous what they can do with plastics these days." The executives' offices ran along the front of the first floor, known as the Golden Mile. Cam's design teams for the first time enjoyed spacious modern accommodation and the most advanced computing of the day. With the Ham redevelopment completed, the company finally moved out of Canbury Park Road, its home since 1914. The former Kingston Polytechnic took over the old factory and housed its School of Engineering there until 1994.